Instantly opens lines for the queen and threatens central control, a common and purposeful start. Establishing central pawn presence immediately contests the queen's pawn initiative. Challenging the center's control, this creates immediate pawn tension and opens diagonal lines for your bishops. Establishing a robust pawn chain, this solidifies the center's defense. Fortifying the center and preparing for pawn advances, white develops a piece actively. Developing the knight to a natural square, the knight begins its journey to influence the center and prepare for kingside castling. Solidifying the center's structure opens up queenside development and prepares for a controlled advance. Preparing a fianchetto, black aims for active piece play and influence along the long diagonal, subtly challenging white's central control. Solidifying the center, this knight prepares for a potential pawn advance on the kingside or supports a central pawn structure. Developing the bishop to its natural diagonal here harmonizes piece placement, preparing for castling and reinforcing the queenside structure. Developing the bishop to allow castling, a standard step toward king safety. Safeguarding the king is paramount. A timely castling secures the monarch in a quiet corner, preparing for eventual central action. Castling on the kingside solidifies your monarch and prepares for central maneuvering, embracing a classic approach to king safety. Solidifying the d5 pawn and preparing for kingside development, this knight repositions to support the central advance and potential pawn breaks. Opening the c-file now offers white immediate pressure along that crucial central column. Centralizing the pawn structure now opens diagonals for your bishops. Asserting queenside influence now. This aims to pressure the d5 pawn and potentially open lines for attack against black's castled position. Solidifying the center and preparing for queenside expansion. This maneuver aims to bring the queenside pawn majority into play. Gaining queenside space is the aim, aiming to restrict black's queenside development and potentially open lines later. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, preparing to challenge the long diagonal and potentially develop the queen's bishop. Developing the bishop to its central diagonal bolsters influence on the queenside and prepares for potential pawn thrusts, subtly restricting black's options. Injecting a knight to the central outpost, e4 forces white to confront piece activity immediately. Preparing for kingside pressure, white subtly repositions their bishop to a more active diagonal, aiming to challenge black's central pawn structure. Developing the bishop to a more active diagonal offers improved influence over the center and potential attacking avenues. Pushing the pawn aims to disrupt black's queenside harmony and seize the open file. Securing a foothold on the queenside, black solidifies the pawn structure and prepares for a potential queenside expansion or a subtle repositioning of pieces. Clearing lines with the capture initiates a positional squeeze on black's queenside pawns, opening avenues for a knight sortie. Reclaiming the pawn, black reasserts central control and opens the queen's diagonal, preparing for piece development. Exchanging queens simplifies the position, shifting focus to the pawn structure and potential outpost on e4. Clearing the queens fosters knight activity on the queenside's open file. Boldly occupying the center with the knight aims to exchange pieces and activate its attack potential. Reclaiming the center and preparing to contest the open c-file signifies a proactive approach in this tense positional struggle. Repositioning the knight to a more active square, it prepares to contest the d-file and support pawn advances. Reactivating the bishop to the queenside is a smart regrouping, preparing to contest the open c-file with queenside piece play. Unleashing the f-pawn disrupts black's knight maneuver, potentially opening lines for white's pieces towards the king. Exchanging those knights simplifies the structure, allowing black to prepare an assault on the d-file while white's queenside is a bit exposed. Reclaiming the outpost on c3 solidifies white's center and prepares to challenge black's queenside majority. The knight repositions to a strong outpost, disrupting white's coordination and aiming for weaknesses. Securing the king is paramount. This maneuver prepares to contest the central files with the monarch as a more active participant. Seizing the open queenside file with the rook aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and activate black's dormant pieces. Securing the rook for potential central activity and eyeing that isolated d-pawn. Probing the queenside weaknesses, black aims to outmaneuver white's somewhat passive setup. This maneuver aims to secure the file and challenge black's queenside pawn structure. This pawn push aggressively seeks counterplay on the queenside, eyeing potential breakthroughs. This pawn push fabricates a crucial outpost for white's knights, aiming to disrupt black's queenside majority and secure a more active position. Suddenly, the knight's foray into enemy territory, while seeming daring, unravels black's defensive pawn structure. Exploiting the pawn's advance, this knight foray aims to disrupt black's queenside coordination and potentially expose the weakened king. The knight boldly ventures into enemy territory, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and potentially exploit the weakened light squares. Capturing the knight opens a clear path for the rook, aiming for active play on the 7th rank and creating imbalances. Reclaiming the knight with the rook establishes active counterplay and challenges white's queenside pawns. Capturing the pawn with the rook solidifies white's central control and prepares to harass black's queenside. Reclaiming the bishop's diagonal opens up fascinating attacking possibilities for black's pawns. Securing the open file with the rook offers white valuable central influence and aims to improve coordination. Shifting the bishop to the edge prepares to contest the crucial diagonal, potentially disrupting white's central control. Pushing the g-pawn might create weaknesses around the king, while aiming to dislodge the knight. Re-establishing knight presence in the center, this maneuver aims to outmaneuver white's pawn structure and potentially create weaknesses. Venturing the monarch forward opens up critical lines, but also exposes him to immediate danger amidst the pawns. Exploiting the open diagonal, black forces a king repositioning and prepares to activate their remaining pieces. Opening the f-file unleashes white's king and invites tactical complications. Opening up the kingside for attack, but this pawn push sacrifices space and creates weaknesses around your own monarch. Clearing the contested pawn structure, this exchange opens lines and offers immediate tactical possibilities in the center. Sacrificing the bishop opens critical lines towards the white king, potentially leading to a swift attack. Relocating the monarch to a slightly safer square, though still exposed to potential threats from the open files. Unveiling a discovered attack, the rook now eyes the central files, challenging white's recently weakened pawn structure. Asserting control of the only open file begins the strategic push for initiative. A daring piece sacrifice attempts to disrupt white's control over the center and open lines for attack. A desperate attempt to gain space on the king side, but it weakens the king significantly. The bishop vacates the now vulnerable 7th rank, creating potential mating threats along the open file. Targeting the isolated c-pawn with the rook opens up new tactical possibilities and pressures black's weakened kingside. Boldly challenging the rook's posting, this piece aims to disrupt white's queenside space advantage and potentially open lines for counterplay. Solidifying the bishop's influence on the queenside pawns creates significant defensive pressure. A retreat to regroup forces, but opens a pathway for white's king. Pressing the advance on the kingside now offers a chance to cramp black's position further. Knight's hop to the kingside offers crucial outpost potential, potentially disrupting white's pawn structure. The king ventures into the fray, seeking shelter or perhaps a bold counterattack amidst the storm. Gaining breathing room and repositioning the knight to a more active square. Pushing the pawn forward opens lines and aims to disrupt the opponent's pawn structure. Shifting the bishop aims to disrupt white's advancing kingside pawns and prepare for potential counterplay on the queenside. Capturing that bishop opens a vital diagonal, targeting the enemy king's safety. Recapturing the rook decisively reopens the b-file, offering active counterplay and the threat of infiltration. Unleashing the knight to the 7th rank creates immediate attacking pressure on black's weakened queenside pawn structure. Sacrificing tempo to unleash the king opens a dangerous diagonal. The king ventures into a risky chase, seeking refuge among active enemy pieces. The knight's journey to e8 feels like a patient repositioning, aiming to support a potential pawn push or rejoin the fight on the king side. Initiating a decisive rook maneuver to exploit the open file and threat material. Shifting the king to a more secure square, aiming to avoid further threats and prepare for endgame maneuvering. Clearing a path for the king's escape route, a crucial step for maneuverability and safety. The king's escape route is now firmly shut off by the rook's imposing presence. Unleashing a tactical fork, this checks the king while threatening the rook, forcing a difficult decision. Sacrificing the bishop here unleashes black's passed pawn and opens lines towards the white king, a bold but potentially risky endgame transformation. The pawn advances, forcing the knight to a less influential square and opening a path for the rook. Unlocking the c-file for the rook is a key objective here, seeking dynamic counterplay against the white king. Unleashing a decisive pawn thrust, white aims to exploit the exposed monarch and create mating threats. Opening the h-file here sacrifices the pawn, but opens pathways for the rook and knight. Initiating the decisive pawn march toward the black king's vulnerable stronghold. A desperate attempt to stir complications, though the king looks quite exposed. The king's escape route is now blocked by pawn pressure and potential mating nets. Recognizing the king's precarious position, black prioritizes defensive positioning over aggressive pawn capture. Promotion secures a material advantage and a decisive attack against the exposed black king. The king, now exposed, faces a mating net woven by white's queen and rook. A decisive discovered check forces the black king into an exposed position, leading to a swift material advantage. The king's exposed position demands immediate defensive awareness, focus on regrouping pieces. Forcing the black king into a corner with tempo, securing the promotion path. The black king, abandoned and exposed, now faces relentless pressure as white's rook orchestrates a decisive mating attack. Consolidating the king's position brings it closer to the action, preparing for the final push. Conceding the central pawn sacrifices control, opening lines that might become precarious for the black king's safety. Pushing the b-pawn here seems a bit passive given the queens are off. Focus on activating that rook instead.